I don't think there's any of us that argue that our country is headed in the right direction right now from the perspective of the Christian family. About 5 months ago, Alan Morris brought me an article that he had written. And I said, Alan, would you present that to our folks right before the 4th of July? Because it's what we need to hear. And I think coming from a lay person, it will carry more weight than coming from a pastor. So I've asked Alan Morris. Alan is a member of our church now for 3 years, and Alan comes to the second service primarily to come and share about that. And the title of his message is, What Has Happened to America? Listen to what he's got to say, and to the challenge to us as a church to make a difference for our country. Alan, come share what God has given to you.
Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and share some of my thoughts. I titled this, What Has Happened to America? And you see here 2 pictures of St. Paul's Chapel. The one on the left, my left side, is from many years ago, about the time we were founded as a nation. The one on the right is a modern photo of that. George Washington's inauguration day was designated as a day of prayer and dedication. After inauguration, the new president led the Senate and House of Representatives to the place appointed for their prayers. It was a little stone church called St. Paul's Chapel. That gathering is recorded in the annals of Congress as the first joint session of Congress with an acting president. It's the first collective act of the newly formed American government was to gather for prayer to give thanks and specifically commit the future of America into the holy protection and blessing of God. And we see here a picture that I got of that event. America rose to heights no other nation had ever known. Although not without sin, America aspired to fulfill its calling, to be a vessel of redemption, an instrument of God's purposes, and a light to the world. America gave refuge to the world's poor and needy and hope to its oppressed. It stood against tyranny and fought against the dark movements of communism, socialism, and fascism that threatened to engulf the earth, and it liberated millions. As it fulfilled its calling, America became the most blessed, the most prosperous, the most powerful, and the most revered nation on earth. Think about it. If it hadn't been for the United States of America and our involvement in World War II, the whole world would probably be a communist place now. But America has begun turning away from God. We've increasingly taken God out of our public lives. The mention of God or Jesus in a religious context, in a public place other than church, is increasingly taboo and unwelcome. Which was once revered as sacred is now increasingly treated as out of place or wrong. Nativity scenes, Christmas parties are now called holiday parties, etc. I was on the faculty of the University of Florida for 7 years, stationed at the Citrus Research and Education Center in Lake Alfred. The first couple of years from 2007 to 2012. And the first Christmas I was there, we had a Christmas party. The last Christmas I was there, it was called a holiday party. And they didn't play religious songs. They played contemporary top 40 hits. As God has been driven out, idols have replaced him. Idols of greed, money, success, materialism, sexual immorality, self-worship, self-obsession. These have always been present, but never as present or prevalent as they are now. America has forgotten its foundations, its purpose and its calling. The standards and values we have long upheld, we're now abandoning. What we once knew as immoral, now we accept it. We're abandoning our religious foundations. Pornography began penetrating our media in the 60s. It's now more predominant than ever. The nation once dedicated to spreading God's light to other nations is now filling the world with the pornographic and the obscene in the TV shows and movies. in the view now portrayed to the world about today's American way of life. I was in China in November of 2011. I was a guest speaker at a Naval Orange Festival, an event with about 4,000 people. It lasted a week. We had an interpreter, Yi Kenyon, who spoke about 6 languages, had a degree in agriculture. And she'd never been out of China. We formed a relationship through emails. I have an email distribution list, and I put her on it. And as I began to share emails with her, she was absolutely shocked at the immorality in this country. I mailed her some movies, and they were common family-type movies. But even so, as I began to share links to different sites, she couldn't believe what we were now versus what she read that we had been at one point in time. Ultimately, I wasn't allowed to email her. The Chinese government shut it down. They didn't want me communicating with her. But there's one observation right there that is disturbing to me. Some called it freedom of speech, and others called it tolerance. It was a tolerance for everything opposed to God. A growing tolerance for immorality, profanity, and the unrighteous. A growing intolerance for the pure. A tolerance that mocked, marginalized, and condemned those who remained faithful to the values now being discarded. A tolerance that put the profane on public display and removed nativity scenes from public sight. Like ancient Israel, America offered its children up for sacrifice. Not in the same way ancient Israel did, but sacrificed just the same. 10 years after removing prayer and scripture from its public schools in 1973, I believe the nation legalized the killing of its unborn when it legalized abortion. By the dawn of the 21st century, America had sacrificed 34.3 million unheard voices by abortion. The number is currently 50 million, more than the populations of Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina combined. I was adopted when I was 3 months old. My mother was engaged to be married, and the engagement broke off as she was pregnant. She had the money to get an abortion, but she didn't. She put me up for adoption. And she dealt with the agony of not knowing what happened to me. I was adopted at 3 months. I found her. I served on the board of the Children's Home Society from 1987 to 89. And they helped me locate her, and I paid the cost of their search because I didn't want to use their resources. And I located her living in Grants Pass, Oregon. And we formed a relationship. She passed away in 2011, but we had a close relationship with her and my 3 half-sisters. That's another presentation I may make to the church one day as well. 2 Chronicles 7, a summary of 19 to 22. But if my people turn away and forsake my commandments, which I have set before them, then will I allow evil to be cast upon them because they forsook the Lord God of their fathers. That evil was a breach in America's wall of defense, the attacks of 9/11. The World Trade Center collapsed in a colossal heap of ruins. A symbol of America's economic power, proud, majestic, and towering, the most powerful nation on earth, the most sophisticated defense system ever built, yet its wall of defense was breached. I believe this was a warning to give America time to reconsider turning back to God. The ground of America's consecration was unharmed, that little stone chapel. The ground on which America was committed in prayer to God at St. Paul's Chapel, located at the corner of what centuries later would become ground zero for the attacks of 9/11. Those attacks destroyed or badly damaged all buildings around ground zero. Buildings in front of the little stone chapel, behind St. Paul's Chapel, it was completely untouched. People couldn't believe it, thought it was a miracle. It was a miracle. That was where America had been committed to God. Why is America walking away from its religious principles? The declining influence of the church, the makeup of today's family. I grew up in a little town called McClenny, 30 miles west of Jacksonville, Florida. Dan was a minister there in the late 80s, early 90s. I didn't live there then. But on Sunday, everything closed. And, you couldn't buy gasoline or groceries or anything. And everybody went to church. I'd say 95% of the population of Baker County, Florida, was in church on Sundays. And nothing else was even discussed or heard of. Not so today, not even there. Let's look at the declining influence of the church. Today's economy requires 2 working parents. Increasingly, it's mostly people that are retired that have time to attend church. And churches got to compete now with TV, with over 100 channels. The internet, computer games, the shopping mall, scores of recreational activities people can choose in today's society. And let's look at the makeup of today's family. 2-parent households are no longer the predominant family structure. In 1964, when Johnson declared war on poverty, 30% of families with children were headed by a single mother. That figure is now 60% according to the U.S. Bureau of Census. Single-parent households are now a predominant family structure. Most are fatherless, which means they lack a positive role model. I grew up in a single-parent family. My dad was killed when I was 7 years old. He was mowing with a John Deere tractor, pulling a bush hog mower behind it, and he looked back and threw a piece of wire into his eye and into his brain. I was with him when it happened. He died the next morning in the hospital having surgery. So I grew up in a single-parent household. My mother and our grandparents lived next door. But our community was different. Sheriff Ed Yarber had been a good friend of my dad's. He was the county sheriff, and he took me hunting on his ranch in Taylor. Archie Robertson, a decorated World War II Marine, took me swimming and taught me how to make a flotation device out of your pants legs by tying them in knots and flinging them over your head. You could float between the bulbous legs, and said that Jesus was our flotation. We just had to depend on him to protect us and keep us strong. Senator Edwin Fraser and his wife Jackie took me with him to their beach vacation home, and they explained what my mother was going through, what a fine man my dad was. So the community helped support me when I lost my dad. So my single-parent household really wasn't like a single-parent household. But let's get back to the makeup of today's family. Children who grew up with both of their biological parents grew up to become more responsible adults, according to a study by McClellan and Sanford. They finish high school more often. They attend college more often. And they earn more income, particularly in early childhood. Children who grew up in single-parent households are disadvantaged economically and socially, according to the Encyclopedia of Children's Health. They have lower levels of educational achievement, twice as likely to drop out of school, more frequently abuse drugs and alcohol, and they're twice as likely to go to jail. And as we said, single-parent households are now a predominant family structure. 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people shall humble themselves and pray and seek my grace and turn from their wicked ways, then will I forgive their sin and will heal their land. So what can we do as Christians to help influence people to turn back to God? Anybody got any suggestions? Pray. I'm doing this. I'm hoping I can make this presentation in front of different groups, get people to think and think for themselves, realize what's going on. But I don't know what to do. You can't compete with all the negative press and media and, increasingly politicians that find it unpopular to talk about God or Jesus. I don't know what to do. But I'm trying. Anyway, thank you. Thank you very much.